Hello, this is Teja Gerken with Peghead Nation, and I'm here to show you the Grace Design Felix acoustic instrument preamp. The Felix is a very interesting product, really designed for any acoustic instrument applications, whether you're running one pickup, two pickups, multiple instruments, combining pickups with microphones, or you need extensive EQ options. They've really thought of pretty much every application and every feature that you might want in an acoustic preamp and put it into one box. It's a very unique product, and I'm going to take a little time to walk you through it. So the Felix is built by Grace Designs, and if you've been paying attention to studio equipment, you will know that Grace has had a great reputation for building high-end studio mic preamps and preamps in general, and they've applied that know-how to this box, which is really directly targeted toward instrumentalists using acoustic-type pickups or microphones. Fundamentally, there are two channels, and they can either be used to blend two different sources, such as a pickup and a microphone. What you just heard, by the way, is my Lowden played through just one of the channels. I'm using a LR Baggs Anthem pickup, and you heard a blend of a direct out from the preamp and a Fishman Loudbfx Mini amplifier. So I was just using one side of the preamp for that. We're going to get to demoing the double channel setup a little bit later. One thing that is somewhat unique about the Felix is that there are a lot of functions that work hand in hand together. For example, there are dip switches on the side of the unit that modify or control some of the features that the buttons on the face have. And so there's a lot of customizable options with it. There are even some dip switches inside the unit. You have to open the chassis to access them that allow you to modify some of the sounds and some of the features that are available. So it's very customizable. Let me walk you through it. Each channel starts with a gain control, very standard, has a little LED on the side that will light up if you're overloading the signal. The second knob is a combination high-pass filter or notch filter, and that is controlled with the dip switches on the side. So notch filter for many acoustic players is very useful for combating feedback. A high-pass filter can be very useful if you're on a big stage and playing through a big PA and you have some low-end rumble. So you can choose which of those you're using. There's two dip switches, so one channel can be the high-pass filter, the other one can be the notch filter. Very configurable. The next is a low EQ, fairly standard. And then we have a fully parametric midsection, and that is very powerful. You can, of course, select your mid frequency, and again, by way of the dip switches on the side, you can actually choose two different ranges of mid frequencies, and you can experiment with which one sounds better for you, which are then cut or boosted with the general mid control, and there's a mid Q that selects the width of the band that you're cutting or boosting. This is followed by a standard high control, high EQ for each channel, and as you can see in my settings here, I was boosting the highs a little bit. I actually cut my lows somewhat, and I had the mid frequency just dialed out a little bit to get a little bit of the more natural sound with the pickup signal that you were hearing. That is followed with a button for boost up here on the top. This controls both channels and affects the boost foot switch. I haven't mentioned that there are 3 foot switches to the unit. And there's an amp headphone control, which controls either a headphone jack, a mini jack on the side. That's very useful if you're just dialing in sounds, experimenting with the little dip switches and what settings you're going to use, as well as a 1/4-inch amp output, which is what I was using to drive my Fishman Loudbfx Mini here in the studio. There is a mix control, which allows you to go completely to one of the channels or the other channel or right in between. So you can sort of dial in your mix between the two signals if you're using it as a blender. So I mentioned the foot switches. On the very left, we have a foot switch that switches between the two channels. This would primarily be used if you are using the unit to use two instruments. One can be, let's say, the guitar. The other one might be your mandolin or two guitars. And the dip switches on the side, again, control how the unit works. Right now, it's actually not activated, which is why both lights come on, since I'm not switching between instruments. There's the boost function that I already mentioned, very useful for kicking in a little louder signal if you're playing a solo. And there's a mute function, which completely mutes the signal, with the exception of a signal that can be sent via a tuner output on the back of the unit. So you can mute the signal into the house in your amp, but you can still drive your tuner. Okay, so now that we've gone through some of the functions of the unit, let me just play it a little bit more in its basic one signal configuration. Again, I'm playing this Lowden O10. It's got an LR Baggs Anthem pickup in it, and I'm going through a Fishman Loudbfx Mini, and what you're hearing is a combination of the room mic picking up the amp and a direct signal from the Felix. So I'm just going to show you very briefly the ranges of the different EQ settings so you get a sense of how you might use them to shape your sound. I'm going to start out here with the settings that I used for playing with the guitar. But for example, the high pass filter, which I've had completely off because I just didn't have the need for it in this setting. But you can tell how much it really rolls off the low end there. That's in the high pass filter setting. I'm not at high enough volumes here to really make use of the notch filter, but it's a very surgical kind of a tool, and I have tried it at louder volumes with this box, and it's very effective to combat feedback, especially with the microphone. It's just difficult to reproduce here in the video studio with those volumes. The low setting, which I had cut just a little tiny bit, tell also not only very effective, but very musical sounding. Like when you add something, it's really something that you want to add to your signals. The mid control, of course, is very powerful. I'm going to set this. I'm going to boost the mid gain and go through the frequencies here. You can tell, as with any parametric mids, I'm going to set the Q to kind of the wider setting. So you can really either find a frequency and then cut it, or if you want to add certain frequencies, of course, you can do that too. Again, parametric mids are very powerful tools that will take some time to get used to. Every unit has a slightly different functionality, but extremely powerful, and I'm a big fan of having these on stage, as you can either dial out deficiencies in your pickup system or deficiencies in the room, your overall sound, your PA. Just extremely useful tool to have. And finally, we have the high control. Okay, so I now have a slightly different setup here. I still have my Lowden's LR Baggs Anthem plugged into channel 2 of the Felix, but I also have a Neumann KM-184 small diaphragm condenser mic plugged into the XLR input of the unit, taking full advantage of the mic preamp function of this. And I'm going to show you what that sounds like going directly to our recording setup here. I'm not using the amp for this demo. I'm going to start by just showing you using only the Neumann microphone recorded straight through the Felix. As you can see, I've slightly boosted the bass and cut the highs on this. The KM-184 is a fairly bright microphone, so I took advantage of having a little bit of control over that. So here's just the mic by itself. And now let's go all the way to channel 2, and we're not going to hear the Neumann at all. We're only going to hear the anthem that's in this Lowden guitar. And finally, I'm going to go to a 50-50 blend. The exact blend you might use could vary, but this gives you an idea of just having both of the signals in the overall sound. So even though I've been demoing the Felix with my guitar right here, as I mentioned earlier, it really is designed to be used with all acoustic instruments, and it's designed to work with all kinds of pickups and microphones. So let's also have Peghead Nation's Dan Gabel give it a whirl with his Collings mandolin.
Hi, I'm Dan Gabel with Peghead Nation, and like Teja said, the Felix is designed for all acoustic instruments. So I'm here with my Collings MT-2 mandolin, and I have an Audio-Technica PRO 35 condenser microphone on this. It's running directly into the XLR input in channel 1 on the Felix, which is a great feature to have in the preamp. I typically will run this into a separate mic preamp that has phantom power. The Felix already has phantom power, and then into a separate DI box, and then into the house PA or an amplifier or what have you. So the great thing about this is it really condenses all of this into one box that I can also plug a guitar into and have separate EQ for both the instruments. So that's the setup. This microphone tends to be pretty bright, so the Felix adds a nice warmth there, and I've dialed in a few settings that I typically use when amplifying this instrument. So I'll just play it a little bit so you get a sense of what it sounds like on the mandolin.
Okay, so let's have a look at the inputs and outputs that I found on the Felix, as well as the dip switch functions on the side. So I'm going to start with the in and output panel on the back of the unit. So there's two channels, so we're starting with 2 1/4-inch inputs, one for each channel. There are 2 little 3-position switches that allow you to switch the input impedance from medium, high to low. Very useful. Whether you have active and passive pickups, for example, or stronger or weaker pickup signals, you can experiment what works the best with this. And it's definitely designed to improve the sound of passive pickups, such as soundboard transducers, magnetic pickups in one of the settings, and also to work with strong, high-powered active signals. One very cool feature that not very many units have is that channel 2 can also be used with a tip ring sleeve stereo 1/4-inch cable for a stereo setup. If you have a pickup and a mic and you're sending out a stereo signal with a TRS cable, you can use this input and take advantage of the 2 channels to blend the signal right in here. There's even 12-volt low-level phantom power that's available to send to a little electric microphone. So very flexible that way, and like I mentioned, not very many units these days have that functionality. Very cool. Channel 1 also has a XLR input, standard microphone input, and you can switch between a line and mic signal right here. The amp source for the amp output can be selected to either be a mix of the two or just the channel 2, which is again very clever, because sometimes if you're playing loud on stage, all you want is the pickup signal in your monitor amp, not the microphone signal, to avoid feedback. So you can select that you either send a mix of both signals or only the pickup to the amp. Again, very practical, very thought out feature. It's followed by a set of 4 1/4-inch jacks one for Footswitch, and that means you can actually control the onboard foot switches externally with a separate foot switch, so you don't have to have this unit on stage with you necessarily. You can have this in your rack, keep it on your amp, so it's less cluttered. You can just have an external foot switch if you prefer to do that way. There is an insert to insert effects. There's a tuner output that I already mentioned, and it has the amp output, which I was using to drive my Fishman Loudbfx Mini. This is followed by a set of 2 DI outs, one for each channel, and again you can choose whether you have individual outputs for each channel or a mix, which will be a blend between the 2 channels. Depending on your setup, either one can be useful. You can select mic or line outputs with this, and there's a ground switch over here, and the standard power receptacle is right here for a standard power cord, and the unit can run anywhere between 100 and 240 volts. If you take this to Europe or anywhere else in the world, it will work. It does need AC power. You can't run this unit of batteries, but that's to be expected with a high quality preamp like that. You just need more voltage to run the transformers that are in this thing. On the side, the primary function are the set of 6 little dip switches, and that is where you control functions such as the high-pass filter notch filter combination. Up is one way, down is the other, one for each channel. You'd select which mid-range frequency range the mid control controls, and you can control whether 12-volt phantom power is on channel 2. And finally, the last switch controls the mode, whether it's an AB mode to switch between the 2 channels using the foot switch, or whether both are just on all the time. So these switches are kind of set and forget. You would probably set it up so that it works with your particular setup, your particular setting. It's easy enough to switch, but again, you're not going to switch them accidentally because they're right here on the side. Over here, we have a button to turn on 48-volt phantom power for the microphone input, the XLR input, and we have phase controls for both channels right here with the little gray buttons. So I hope you've enjoyed this demo. Check the Felix out for yourself. Grace Designs has just also introduced a single channel version of this, so if you are only looking for the high quality preamp sound and the powerful EQ and don't need 2 channels, you can check that version out. And please come back and visit us here at Peghead Nation for more gear demos. My name is Teja Gerken.